From bloom time to boom time. Ever since that fall in 1876, when Dr. Border planted apples for the first time in his 40-acre tract in Carneysville, people laughed, but not for long. Dr. Border remembered later, "When my neighbors saw me planting this fruit orchard, they smiled and shook their heads in amazement, saying that I had made a mistake. But I was a visionary, and I would not be able to get rid of such a crop." And they said it was lost time, etc., etc. Then years later, when they saw the apples selling for $1.25 to $2.25 per barrel, they all immediately began planting orchards too. And how did they plant orchards? By 1910, there were so many orchards planted in the Berkeley and Jefferson County region, fueled primarily by the profitability of York Imperial, Ben Davis, and Winesap apples, that prime orchard land was going for 3 times and even 4 times per acre value than the best farmland. The glory days were just beginning for apples in the Shenandoah Valley. Apples grown in Washington State had not quite had their full impact on the markets, and city folks were getting to really love eating apples. There was plenty to go around. In 1916, for example, just Berkeley County harvested 800,000 bushels of apples. Plenty to go around and plenty to waste. The first way that apples were harvested was you had men on ladders with large burlap bags picking all the apples they could. They brought their apples to a sorting and packing table right in the middle of the orchard, which was moved about sequentially. Women, particularly, would sort the apples, putting them in 2 categories as they rolled down the slanted table. Generally, half the apples were discarded for cider and other byproducts. The good apples were then put in barrels, and the barrels were sealed and topped off with portable sealing equipment. They were then loaded onto wagons and taken to the railroad cars. Now, because of the rough handling of the apples, most of them went to peddlers in the cities who sold them on street curbs. Yes, things were really booming until 1920, when the bottom fell out of the apple industry. Why? Well, the folks out west had really learned how to grow apples, and the Red Delicious apple from Washington State was beginning to be felt in the eastern markets. Railroad rates favored long-term hauling, which favored the western coast orchardists. And the war ended, and the demand for apples, particularly in Europe, fell. Orchardists everywhere could no longer afford to be wasteful and inefficient. In 1922, federal authorities began inspecting the way apples were sorted, making sure standards were kept high. And the sprays that were begun to be used to make pretty eating apples were inspected as well, so they weren't too poisonous. Growers began growing better quality eating apples such as the Winesap and the Stamen, along with York Imperials, and our friend old Ben Davis, Mr. Hard as a Rock Ben Davis. People finally caught on to him, and he was dropped by 1920 from most markets. Greater efficiencies took the form of packing and sorting apples within a centralized shed or center. Baskets and buckets were used instead of the big burlap bags, and orchards were larger. By 1941, there was 5,000 acres devoted to growing apples in just Jefferson County. And these trees, according to Charles Prince, who devoted his master's thesis on the subject, were producing as many as 7 bushels per tree, compared to 2 and 3 bushel averages for apple trees in 1916. Virginia's famous political boss, Harry Flood Bird, took most of his profits from running the Winchester Star newspaper and bought land for apple orchards, so that by 1940 and 50, he owned the largest continuous orchard in the world. After all was said and done, the growers out west beat the growers back east. This was because the railroad favored long-term hauling from the west coast, providing lower rates, and the growers in the Shenandoah Valley found that they were competing head-on and losing to apple growers in North Carolina who could get their apples to the market sooner. Apples are not only big business today in the Shenandoah Valley and Cumberland Valley, they're part of the culture. Practically everyone you'll ever meet here who grew up here remembers picking apples after school or on weekends with their mother, with their father, or as a mother or father. Apples are in the air, and apples are part of the way of life.